This is No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism.
Awful smoke for a rebel.
Written by Valerie H. Hobbs. Read by the author. With original music by Jonathan and Caroline Hodges. Originally published in open access print form by Mayfly Books. Womb. There are 3 things that will not be satisfied, 4 that will not say enough. The barren womb. Proverbs chapter 30, verses 15 to 16.
What's that you're reading? About the bed where you sleep.
Chapter 10. It has been a conscious policy of government to liberate the wife from the leadership of the husband, and thus break up the family as a unit of government. First, Howard Phillips said, in the 1800s, legislation was passed that gave women property rights. Second, we saw how women were liberated from the leadership of their husbands politically. You know, it used to be that in recognition of the family as a basic unit of society, we had one family, one vote. And we have seen the trend instead toward one person, one vote. The ultimate extension of this philosophy has been the sexual liberation of the woman from her husband, said Phillips. And hence, he said, we got adultery, promiscuity, and so forth. Judy Mann, listening in on speech by pro-family orator, The Washington Post, October 31st, 1980. Little Billy now wants to get his ears pierced, and little Sally now dresses like a prostitute. Parents who allow their teenage daughters to wear short skirts and bikinis are another problem. Brian Abshire, Dealing with Rebellious Christian Teenagers. The Council of Chalcedon, 2002, Issue 2. Today we will be talking about the ladder of promiscuity. Our small school sat in rows of padded chairs in the immense church sanctuary, youngest in front. One of our church school's Bible teachers, also an elder of course, stood at the front, as always at his most passionate when talking about personal piety. Each act of obedience to the law was a seed planted in the grassroots movement by which we holy white people would raise heaven from our earthly efforts. When preaching, when teaching, this man's whole zealous body boiled and bubbled over, eventually producing pale globules of spit at the corners of his mouth, which occasionally dropped away. Today we were gathered together, in part because our church school magazine had published an article on teenage promiscuity. If parents fail in their responsibility to deal with wantonness among children, the church must step in. And to our Bible teachers' disgust and delight, indistinguishable as they were, there had been reports of another debaucherous high school party. I was 14. Parties like these often took place at the behest of church leaders' kids, though adults never discussed the relevance of this in front of mere children. Here was where the repressed exercised liberation, and the most reckless kids from the most untouchable families led the way. I saw them exchange knowing glances at school, recite jokes only they understood, hinting at experiences only they shared, mocking the blank faces of the absent and uninvolved. The youngest of our pastor's sons, Matthew, reported snippets of the older crowd's revelry to me, all disapprovingly, though he too had joined in, by rights bestowed on him by birth. Our phone calls almost always operated as his confession booth, and I his priest of sorts. For hours sometimes he heaved upon me all his emotional baggage. The click of the receiver returning to its cradle, signaling his absolution and my further idealization. The first rung of the ladder of promiscuity is dressing to attract attention. Girls, you might do this by wearing tight or low-cut blouses. I sat lower in my seat, not daring to catch anyone's eye, my cheeks growing hot. I didn't own any tight or low-cut clothing, yet I was suddenly hyper-aware of the pressure of my buttocks against the seat, the heft of the half-moons on my chest, presently concealed by my bulky, crested school sweatshirt. It was a hot, humid day, and tendrils of my thin, reddish-blonde hair curled around my face. This somehow seemed now irreverent, too. I pushed my legs together tightly and positioned my feet under the chair, crossing my arms over my stomach, an instinctive tool in every shrinking woman's repertoire. I'd recall this moment years later, when a roommate at university showed me a Sabbath trick her mother taught her, of positioning a Bible strategically against her body, its blessed angularity concealing sacrilegious softness, a full chest or rounded stomach. Men would see only the word and none of our flesh. My mother, too, disapproved of the existence of both girls' and women's bodies. We pretended they didn't exist, speaking about them rarely and only in coded whispers. This was how. We imagined ourselves as ephemeral spirits in disguise, occupying tinted clothing, ghosts under a sheet, collapsing at the touch. We lived not in the realm of the flesh, but in the realm of the spirit. If indeed God lived in us. And did he? To wear revealing clothing was to tell a lie, to fail to put to death the misdeeds of the body, to communicate the existence of things that shouldn't exist. Fitted jeans might reveal the curve of a thigh. The visible strap of a bra might suggest a possible reality of breasts, might blaspheme them into being. Let there be boobs, let there be legs. And there were boobs and legs, and men saw that they were very bad. Perhaps men's bodies would resurrect at the final day of judgment, but girls? Women's? Such straw, such stuffing would surely be burned away, had come from the discarded dust of men's more original bodies, and to the dust they would return. Who could blame men for their response to any unsettling of this sacred order our feminine forms committed? They were unwitting recipients of any such deceitful, immodest lessons, innocent of whatever our flesh enticed their hands to do. The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me her body, and I ate. Adults talked perpetually in front of us about girls whose bodies were too visible, too robust, too substantial, too sickly, too weak. The so-and-so girl's butts are too big. If only so-and-so disciplined her diet, she might find a husband. If she were thinner, she'd be happier. So-and-so puts on too much eyeliner for church. I saw so-and-so wearing bodysuits in worship. Can you even imagine? Every gathering was an opportunity to scan and judge, to accumulate information, to recalibrate one's position by trampling another. Nothing was off limits. Yet, like all our rules, our version of purity culture was riddled with hypocrisy. The elder's wife, most openly critical of other girls' clothes and makeup, was also the most lenient with her own daughter's wardrobe choices. The elder who initiated a bulk purchase of the book Christian Courtship versus the Dating Game, he was also the most permissive about makeup. Our pastor was adamant that piercings of any kind were ungodly. Yet his children smoked and drank underage and listened to whatever music they fancied. Hot and cold, here and there, up and down, everyone had opinions and arguments. Everyone made it their daily profession to outdo themselves in drawing and redrawing definitive lines, in dishonoring one another and honoring themselves. Yet even according to the almighty adults, adorning ourselves with proper clothing, modestly and discreetly, according to our fickle and self-contradictory system, this was only a short-term solution to the problem that is women, a stopgap. The long-term answer was, of course, marriage. Whew, marriage! Finally, marriage! We thought it had never happened for her, but at long last, it has. The pastor's wife once listed her children's names in an announcement, complete with a blank line and question mark after the daughter who wasn't yet married. To be completed, to be determined, work in progress. In the beginning, men created the universe. Women were fulsome and void, and obscurity was over the surface of their bodies. The spirit of men hovered over their shape. Then men said, "Let her be mine." And then, as if by magic, babies appeared. Their lives birthed into our commune triumphantly via the most sacred of information delivery devices, the pulpit. Usually in the form of an elaborate poem written by the father-to-be and read dramatically by our pastor. Breaking news headline: Woman finally saved through childbearing. Parents sighed with hope and relief at the thought, and then finally the reality. Audible gasps of rejoicing accompanied these announcements, to mark that brief period of celebration in a woman's limited life, lasting between the moment of conception and a year, maybe 2, after her baby was born, until the risk of wickedness sets in again. Time for another pregnancy. A man I know moved from England to Arizona a few years ago and was unprepared for another conservative evangelical church's similar elation, their chorus of cheers. Once because a woman and her daughter were simultaneously found to be with child. According to my incredulous friend, the minister had even pumped his fist in excitement as he proclaimed such glad tidings. I shrugged when my friend reported this to me. I wouldn't have been surprised if the whole congregation had jumped to their feet and run 7 laps around the room, shouting and blasting their trumpets to mark the collapse of the wall that was another woman's hymen. So everyone charged straight in, and they took her uterus. As a child, listening to these elaborate announcements, I recall watching certain women quietly slip out of the room weeping, the memory of their reproductive loss unnoticed and unmourned, trampled under the eager boasts of the holy mob, zealous to win the world through the wombs of women. And what of the women who never satisfied our community's demands over our reproductive systems? Years after I left my church school, I visited my friend Leah in her parents' home. Her sisters dropped in. "No time to waste. Haven't you heard? Our eldest sister's husband had a vasectomy. What use is she now?" Their sharp words like knives eagerly cutting even the bonds of blood, reinforcing our savage sisterhood. The concept of asexuality was, of course, absolutely foreign to us. Any single woman was seen as exceptionally unnatural, stuck as she was in purgatory with purposeless breasts, vagina, and womb. Men and women frequently deliberated with one another on that undesirable state of being useless, unleashed, or worse, unwanted. Heaven help the undesired, because there's nothing more we can do for her. These messages were always delivered loudly, and often in the presence of the offending girl-woman. In these moments we were she, her, and almost never you. In this way required to listen, included by force, yet simultaneously excluded, both the subject of the conversation and its object. She looks so pretty today. When will someone snatch her up? What she really needs is a husband. Her education is important up to a point, so her husband doesn't get bored with her. Promiscuity was not just being sexually uninhibited. It was to be unrestrained, unrestricted, unbridled, unconventional, uncontrolled, daring to exist, to distract, and even worse, to prosper, without the rightful oversight and exploitation of men. Loose, wild. Many of us internalized this compulsion to be securely positioned under close supervision, to be chewed up and swallowed, digested by manly desire. "I can't wait to submit to my husband," Leah whispered to me excitedly one Sunday, expecting shortly to be engaged. At a church picnic, her church elder father snuck up behind her mother as she played horseshoes and pinched her ass, grinning as he displayed before all our eyes what he was in a position to take, what he and his hands alone could grab and whenever. There were many among us who could imagine freedom and fulfillment only as marriage, the only mechanism to leave the family home, away from the suffocating control of patriarchal parents, trading one despot for another. Maybe this one would be better. This theme of ownership followed me relentlessly to university and beyond. "Why isn't anyone dating you?" a college study partner puzzled, he surprised by the fact of my unclaimed intelligence. Holding hands, kissing on the cheek, then the lips, fondling each other's genitals over top of clothing. Here was my high school Bible teacher again, each rung in his ladder of promiscuity growing more and more explicit, blending into a single horrifying climax. We had never heard such talk from our teachers before. It was impossible to mask so much collective mortification, yet every child was trying. Bodies turned to stone in every seat. Each squirm was an admission of immorality. We'd surely turn to salt if our eyes moved even half an inch. My mother, as a teacher also in attendance, could stand this mockery of her carefully honed modesty no more. "We're leaving," she announced to the room. "This is inappropriate." Her catch-all word for whatever was false, whatever was ignoble, whatever was wrong, impure, unlovely, abominable, whatever was worthy of condemnation, we were never to think on such things. She washed our mouths out with soap when we did. She tapped me on the shoulder, and I joined my siblings in the corridor. Somehow our exit was even worse than staying for whatever licentious level was next, camouflaged in the herd as I had managed to remain until then. We drove home in silence, the only known cure for the falsehoods we'd heard. Such mixed messages were profoundly confusing. Language about sex, about bodies, all this was implicitly and sometimes explicitly labeled as forbidden, coarse, unwholesome. Sexual immorality and all impurity must not even be named among us girls. Yet those with self-appointed authority established all our rules, made rigid decisions, then broke them, changed them at whim, demonstrating the location of the law as internal to themselves. These men, in their bodies, their words, their actions, they were the commandments, the statutes, and the laws. They the word fashioned into man-flesh. The summer before I turned 15, I began attending our church youth group, led by a young man under the singular ministerial tutelage of our pastor. Most meetings we played sexually awkward games, one where we girls sat in a circle, instructed to remain absolutely straight-faced, while boys whispered the phrase, "Honey, I love you," in our ears. Another where in pairs, we boys and girls maneuvered an orange between our bodies pressed together, from abdomens to mouths, without the use of our hands. Afterwards, we listened to moralistic sermons about the faithfulness and unfaithfulness of various biblical figures. One time, as part of a service initiative, we painted the walls of a room in a church member's house. The pastor's eldest son and his friends dipped their hands in paint, pressed them on the backs of girls' t-shirts, then cajoled them until they rotated their shirts to position these painted hands atop their breasts. I both wanted the attention of others and dreaded it, just as I'd learned to loathe my body, yet instinctively shield it. I longed for love, though I'd rarely felt it. Respect, though I'd never known it. Belonging, though I'd never experienced it. I wanted to be seen and understood, yet could imagine nothing worse. I couldn't fathom such gifts without their cost. The hunter, the possessor, the eater, the devourer, the eraser. In 1990, our church hosted the Christian Vision of Victory seminar, featuring an array of men, including R.J. Rushdoony, Walter Bowie, Dan Jordan, and Gary DeMar, alongside our pastor. Each spoke on some vision of the future of world missions, of politics, of medical ethics, of Christian activism. But what was my future? Where could I go? Who would I be, apart from the dictates of all these men? I developed a habit of writing letters to my future self, to speak her into existence, to ensure her survival. To Valerie at 18. To Valerie at 21. To Valerie at 25. Dear Valerie, are you there? Dear Valerie, where are you now? This has been No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism. If you have appreciated this free audiobook and would like to make a donation to the author, please visit this podcast's Spotify site. This chapter contains depictions of violence against children. Listener discretion is advised. This is No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism.
Awful smoke for a rebel.
Written by Valerie H. Hobbs. Read by the author. With original music by Jonathan and Caroline Hodges. Originally published in open access print form by Mayfly Books. Chapter 11. Women's liberation has become a topic of cocktail party conversations, college campus debates, laundry room fantasizings, and General Assembly headaches. Even the most naive of persons cannot plead ignorance of this present controversy. For, besides the deluge of publicity, it is one which hits home. A husband cannot ignore a once contented wife who is suddenly driven to find herself, drop the dishes, and pick up a career. Nor is it likely that an ordained woman behind the pulpit will be accepted without so much as a raised eyebrow, a clenched fist, or perhaps even a letter of transfer. Rita Mancha, The Woman's Authority, Calvin to Edwards. Journal of Reconstruction, Winter, 1979 to 1980, Volume 6, Number 2. One reason for the abundance of sexual offenses was the number of men in the colonies who were unable to gratify their sexual desires in marriage. Edmund S. Morgan, The Puritans and Sex. Journal of Christian Reconstruction, Winter, 1978 to 80, Volume 6, Number 2. In those years, I became whatever version of myself I needed to become to escape the unsafe eyes, mouths, and hands around me. In a community which could not be trusted to respect its members' true selves, I was to every person what would preserve me. An effortless liar, claiming to be here when I was there, right when I was wrong, this kind of person when I was that kind. Yes, I like that too. Yes, I too have heard and seen this or that. Version 2.0, 3.0, I clothed my entire self in camouflage. They would never own me or know me. Half-truths and untruths, all these were my truth. As my pastor and his pals lied to us and to all their enemies, so I lied to them, straight to their very faces. A teacher asked me to tell the class my pattern of studying, since my scores were always high. I fabricated some tantalizing fable about putting my class notes on the piano and playing a tune while reading. I invented friendships from outside our church school, turned down invitations to go here or there. No, I'm sorry, I already have plans with my other friends, those other people from other places, always so eager to spend time with me, people who understand me. Wishful thinking, flat-out lies. Our headmaster's son Timothy told his father I was the only happy girl he knew in our group. Upon hearing this from the headmaster's own lips one afternoon after school, I nearly choked in the effort it took not to expose my surprise by laughing. I was a living web of contradictions, a shapeshifter. I embraced all possible unsteadiness. I hid from everyone, even from myself. And I knew all the best hiding places. For this pattern of self-protection, I paid a terrible cost. At night, I cried all my tangled anger and hopelessness down the shower drain, my stomach protesting with acidic insistence. Any and all food was objectionable. Eventually, most nights, I'd vomit and go to sleep. My teeth kept the score. "Why does she suddenly need so many fillings?" my mother asked. "Her teeth were always so good." Sometimes I'd hold a hand or a foot under the hottest tap setting, practicing my deceit on my own skin, sensing cold, not heat. Such was my skill. I crushed various medications, squeezed out the contents of multiple creams, mixed them all together in warm water in a paper Dixie cup. Sent this toxic mixture to my stomach, apathetic as to what might happen, unaware even of why I'd ever do such a thing. Ignorant of anyone's similar practice before me, I began binding my chest, first in the summer, when pool parties forced the full embodiment of otherwise godly Christian girls' intangible spirits. I tied the straps of my one-piece swimsuit together in the back with a shoelace, a waterproof watch band, dental floss. One time I forgot any such tightening tool. The host of the party, an elder's daughter, was by now liberated in her bikini, she who could do so since a ruling church elder ordained it. She held the center, I could skirt the sides. So I thought, until, leaning over to dry my legs, the pastor's son Matthew caught a glimpse of that perilous valley of death between my breasts. "Valerie!" Practically naked and unashamed, "How dare you?" Without my permission, no one shall expose even a hand or foot in all the land of Egypt." His rebuke reminded me of my place. Some of us were somehow selected as those who would bide our time in chastity, wait in the wings, hands folded patiently like carefully preserved meat, bodies trust for the taking. One friend's church elder father elected to give his daughters a promise ring and a tiny gold lock on a chain to enclose their ring fingers and their necks securely until marriage. The key to this lock would then be passed father to husband by transfer of authority, sealed in condescending public ritual at her wedding. A bridesmaid in her wedding years later, I stood in my gown before an assembly of witnesses, as my friend's father took the lock in his fingers, now drawing the key like a knife across her exposed neck, unbinding her briefly, then legally transferring the custody of her collar to a man whom I'd never once seen smile. The following year, after my university graduation ceremony, her husband agreed to allow his wife to attend the celebratory lunch, though he himself would not be joining us for reasons deliberately unspoken and unknown. Through the window, I watched him drive circles around the restaurant for the duration, each iteration encircling, tightening around her as with loops of a rope. By the meal's end, my friend emerged to meet her master's impatient eye, suitably cinched for transport. "It's a relief when he's away on a trip," she told me some time later, straight-faced, no indulgence in further explanation. Matter of fact, dispassionate, the way of so many women I knew. This was what awaited we schoolgirls in reserve. This was our future. As for girls who rebelled and lived as they wanted to, boys could treat them accordingly, so long as their parents attended another church, beyond the pastor's circle of protection. Fair's fair. They're not really our people. Hey-ho, this is how it goes. Such girls would become fodder for future jokes. "Haha, remember how wild those girls were? It was all so funny, so much fun, fun, fun. Weren't those the days? Wasn't she something?" While the boys sowed their wild oats in anticipation of the prison of marriage they'd soon oversee, I felt certain eyes intensify on me each year. Yet the more I dodged, the more reluctant and elusive I seemed positioned as prey, the stronger the self-determined hunter's desire to capture and consume me, to parade my dominated body, trophy-like, to his lusty band. I meant nothing more to them. Every day seemed a test of my resolve. Would I be taken now or later? I could never be the one who takes. I could never be not taken. Inner circle, outer circle, there were no safe circles. In 9th grade, several new boys joined our class, and I discovered that one lived just up the road from me, had attended the same summer basketball camp I had. I located Thomas's address from the school directory and walked over to say hello. We practiced free throws and layups for a few hours. Struck up a sort of friendship, I thought. One day he invited me to a party at the house of another boy at school, Benjamin, who, when someone dropped a heavy textbook one day in biology class, immediately dove under the desk as if preparing for an air raid. He told some of us that his father struck his and his sister's heads if they didn't do their schoolwork, if they talked back, didn't do their chores. "This is probably why my sister is a bit funny in the head," he reasoned. "Come on up, I'll show you my room," Benjamin said when we arrived. His house was enormous. His parents were hosting some event downstairs. There was champagne, finger food arranged artfully on silver platters, a room full of adults in fancy evening clothes. I followed the rest of our small group up the winding stairs to a bedroom at the end of the hall. Once there, someone closed the door. I don't know who. The boys suddenly combined forces. They pushed me down on the bed. I bumped my head. Hands jostled me, held me down whenever I tried to get up. A disposable camera appeared in someone's hand, flashes that confused me and recorded my violent humiliation. I never saw whatever images they stole from me, whether they preserved them, what they did with them. I remember nothing else in the house after that. I do recall this, though, that Thomas left without telling me, and another boy in our group, Lucas, was somehow my only ride home. He tried to hold my hand in the back seat of his mother's Jeep as she drove towards my house. I was dazed and could not find the words to refuse, though my body conveyed its own messages. "Your hand is so sweaty," I recall him saying. "Why is it so sweaty?" I managed to relocate some language the next day and told him plainly and briefly that no, I was not interested in a relationship of any kind with him. He looked surprised, then angry. "Bitch." He left school early that day, telling everyone he was sick. No one must ever witness any boy's humiliation at the hands of any girl. Though that night I reflected, perhaps he really was sick. Perhaps the angel of the Lord struck him. Perhaps he was eaten by worms. Perhaps he might die. Resting on such hope, these thoughts made me to lie down on my bed that night, led me beside the still waters of sleep. We didn't speak again about any of this. Lucas transferred his attentions quickly to another girl. But one afternoon some months after, he stopped in to where I was again playing basketball at Thomas's house down the road. The two boys chatted a minute as I carried on shooting, then said there was something of mine in his car, a book of mine I'd left somewhere. I could retrieve it if I still wanted it. As I leaned in, looking, the two rushed over and gave me a push, held the door shut so I couldn't get out, their faces jeering and laughing at me through the glass. Again I was a prisoner. I sank again into the mire of my own stupidity. So naive. Not again, I promised myself. Never again. I swore and swore to myself too many times to remember. Cried tears of rage and shame into my pillow. Now this boy Lucas is a man. Now I too am grown. He has found me on social media. He sends me a direct message. "Hey Valerie, it's you. How are you? Been such a long time. Are you still in touch with anyone else?" This unexpected contact propels me suddenly backwards. Now again I can't locate the words I need. Again I am a tongue-tied child. My awkward abruptness sends him on his way. He is gone, but again without penalty. Again. This is the tension that pulled me here and there. Survive, yet submit to slaughter. Maybe just get it all over with. These two impulses continually at war. All power in heaven and on earth belonged to men, and women in the proximity of such power could find some measure of protection and approval only if we pleased men, did their bidding, recruited, corrected, and punished one another and anyone lower than we. All this our pastor blessed with his preaching and teaching, that the men who direct the affairs of the church are worthy of double honor. As for women, our meaning lay in the lives and choices of men. This was the true north of my moral compass, internalized from childhood. Yet, like all living creatures under the sun, I instinctively sought to shield myself from harm. Every awkward and abrupt word, my sweaty hands, even my silence, these were each one a form of resistance, sabotage, mighty acts of rebellion, thundering refusal to submit. All such subtleties were my striking back, my crying out. "That doesn't sound like you," a friend said to me once, when I spoke up sharply and directly in defense of myself. It's likely she meant it as aspiration. "I expect better of you," maybe summarized her rebuke of my forthrightness. A colleague tells me, "You are so quiet and reserved." This too surprises me, privy as I am to my volatile internal wars. This is simply how others experience me, how I am with them. I'm this way and that way. I'm not like this, then suddenly, one day I am. At university, a boy condescendingly criticized my bland style. I look like everyone else, fleece vest, baggy cargos. Why not express myself, live a little? What privilege, to be a peacock instead of a sparrow or a factory chicken, parading and displaying my unique personality instead of scrambling to hide among my sisters, to escape the butcher's knife. Was I not a genuine life form? Was I not living? Was I not grasping after survival, chasing it, claiming and choosing it, fighting for it, every decision a desperate act of self-preservation? Which one of me is real? All? Some? None? Our selves are a series of reactions, accommodations, impressions of every point of contact, held not just within our mortal coil, but also without, in the recollection of other humans, other animals, even the very inorganic elements of the earth. I am whoever I am right now, who I was back then. Tomorrow, I'll still be me. Good and evil, weak and invincible, fixed and flexible, full of rage and turmoil, and altogether calm and completely content. I want to walk with my rucksack towards the sun. I want to sit by the warmth of a fire and see no one for days. I want the mundane and the thrilling. I want to choose between things in ways that only make sense to me. I could have done this. I could have been that, except for them, except for him. What a waste of all these years of my life, all these currents carrying me along, pulling me here and there, without even a crumb of concern for the glaring absence of my conviction. So many of my friends now lament the loss of past possibilities. I too wonder about all that was stolen from me, what might have been, in the absence of all their roadblocks. I have no answers for all our painful questions. It's unjust to measure the repressed and oppressed against people of greater privilege and liberty. Courage and victory take many forms. Who can make sense of such unruly and mismatched fabric as we are truly, except our Creator, there before the world began? This has been No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism. If you have appreciated this free audiobook and would like to make a donation to the author, please visit this podcast's Spotify site. This chapter contains depictions of violence against children. Listener discretion is advised. This is No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism.
Awful smoke for a rebel.
Written by Valerie H. Hobbs. Read by the author. With original music by Jonathan and Caroline Hodges.
In my world.
Originally published in open access print form by Mayfly Books. Chapter 12. Making sexual harassment a crime is dangerous to our liberties in several respects. First, it opens the door to a great deal of subjectivity as to what constitutes behavior which is unwanted, persistent, and abusive. This is a crime that is difficult to prove and is open to interpretation as to what exactly happened. Reverend Steve Schley, Sexual Harassment, The Council of Chalcedon, 1994, Issue 6. In this cruel community of my childhood, there seemed to be no rest between episodes of conflict. To be sure, we were no different than any other school in many respects, in our drug use, sexual assault, teenage pregnancy, abuse of alcohol. Yet the additional spiritual burden we carried, our facade of sacred exceptionalism, this was something else. This moral veneer required endless polishing and repairing, and we worked at mimicking the adults, hiding from each other and from ourselves our true nature and impulses. At 16, I was at Elder's daughter Jenny's house along with the headmaster's son Timothy. The three of us, along with Jenny's sister, had set out to climb up into a decaying treehouse left behind by some previous inhabitants of Jenny's family farm. Over the years, various animals passed through their barns and fields. Chickens, a horse that died after eating some barbed wire, buried afterwards in an enormous pit dug in the family's back pasture. Other odd things happened there. Someone locked a cat in the bathroom on another of my visits. The creature unraveled an entire toilet roll across the room, its footprints documenting its vengeful steps, first in its own feces, then across every inch of tissue. Jenny's mother came out yelling, demanding to know who'd made this mess. And without hesitation, Jenny and her sister blamed me. "Don't worry, we're only saying it's you because she wouldn't hit you." I wasn't following. "But wasn't it the cat?" They shrugged. "Just pretend it was you, Valerie." I said nothing. Still, their mother marched me in there to bag up all that mess. Now, on this particular afternoon, we took turns finding our way up into the treehouse, discovering nothing of interest. Then, as I was climbing back down, my body dangling to reach the branch below, my shirt got caught on a nail. My hands were fully occupied with holding myself up, and so it seemed I had little choice but to continue the drop down and temporarily leave my shirt behind, exposing my fully blossomed chest to the group, tightly encased in a sports bra as usual, but nevertheless, there it was. Apparently, this brief revelation was just long enough to hatch a plan in Timothy's mind. That afternoon, before we left Jenny's house, he told me he admired me, liked me even. "Let's walk together tonight around your neighborhood and talk. I'll come by." I felt again that hidden hindrance, the muddled set of memories of what boys could and probably would very well do. Still, I said only that I liked him too. Words that formed robotically in my mouth without any measurable feeling or coherent cognition. It's more than a little difficult to explain the complex yes and no that mingles and quarrels in the heads of repressed girls and women. The pull for power was by now intuitive, that much I have moderate certainty of. I sensed that Timothy was closer to the center than other boys who'd expressed interest in me. Why not see where I could get with this particular tether? But who's to say? This is only what I suspect are the likely mechanics that produced the set of articulations that came unbidden and unrehearsed from my mouth. Words I almost immediately regretted and wished to take back. He showed up, we walked around the single block of my neighborhood, and as we went, I was again at war within myself. My defensive impulse again took the reins, and I somehow dodged his quick and clumsy efforts at embracing. "Let's save it," I said, wary of the possible penalties of outright refusal. Over the next few days he seemed distant, and I saw him share an odd, knowing glance at school with a girl who thought as little of me as I did her. Something wasn't sitting well. Not trusting myself or him with in-person contact, I wrote Timothy a letter expressing my desire to disassociate with him. Just before my family left for our yearly extended family beach trip, and on the assumption I'd return to a sorted situation, I relaxed into the sun and sand. Until my mother took me aside and handed me the letter, which she'd spied and removed from the mailbox before we left, inappropriate as she believed my initiative to be. Matthew, the pastor's son, finally called me up a few evenings later, revealed that Timothy had told everyone he'd French kissed me for hours in my basement, now claiming a bounty on my head only boys were privy to. Interactions which decided each girl's fate, her station, without her access, her input, her consent. Matthew reported this to me as a matter of established fact, and very disapprovingly. I saw then he'd called to berate me and to probe the damage to the stability of my particular use to him. Was I still pure for his purposes? I immediately denied everything, but what use was this? Nothing I said meant anything in the face of Tim's claims. No woman can ever come as her own witness. From then on, I saw I had fallen in Matthew's eyes. His star from heaven had sunk to the earth. She who had made Tim drink of the wine of the passion of woman's immorality. I couldn't face Timothy again, and we never spoke again about these events. Yet all this had consequences which I alone had to pay for. Not long after, Sophia's brother convinced our Spanish teacher to let him occupy the seat next to me, so he could improve his grades by following her good example. The teacher was only too pleased to see such a misbehaving boy express willingness to be transformed into biblical manhood by the right righteous girl. The challenge began promptly. "How do you say sexy in Spanish?" he whispered in my ear. I ignored him, shot him cold looks, finally fired a frigid warning shot from my water bottle across his bow. Every response only encouraged, escalated, excited. The headmaster required me to write a 2-page essay on the ways spraying water from my drinking bottle showed blatant disrespect for the building, and by extension, the whole school, and by further extension, God Almighty and all the angels of heaven. Sophia's brother showed up suddenly at the door of another class one afternoon after that, bucket of water in tow. He dashed over to deposit its contents over my head. I sat in shock and shame in the expanding puddle as he ran out, victorious, rewarded by so much laughter. The teacher's face was expressionless. "Get changed," she said, before carrying on briskly with the lesson. Sophia's brother wasn't finished with me even then. One evening he told a girl who'd offered me a lift home from youth group that he'd arranged to take me instead. She could head off home now, no need to wait for me. On the way, he veered into ongoing traffic, hydroplaned in the flooded streets, ran red lights, turned the wrong direction. We ended our journey at his house instead of mine. All was unlit. No one was there. He grinned and laughed at my predicament. Another opportunity to frighten, break down, tranquilize, neutralize, humiliate, dominate. I called home from Sophia's kitchen. Please, can you come get me? Yes, I know I didn't have permission to do anything like this. No, I won't do it again. All this escalating attention alerted others to my scent, attracted all those keen to stretch and flex. That boy called Luke openly stared and grinned at me in classes, until finally the teacher commented on it. "Is there something you want to ask, Valerie, Luke?" He lingered in rooms I occupied until everyone else had left. He located me leaning against a wall in the cafeteria and pressed his palms against it beside my face, one on either side of me. He snuck up behind me as I stood at my locker and bit my earlobe. I ducked and dodged, yet he enjoyed the energy of all my unease, like fuel to get him through the day. Subjugation of women, the breakfast of champions. I saw his friends, my friends, watching and laughing at the show he put on at regular intervals at my expense. Another elder son, Joel, told me after Bible class that my outraged retorts to his claims about the limits of women's intelligence had given him a hard-on. Such was I, a feast for the famished. Upon me, boys erected and tested the sturdiness of their manhood. And then, perhaps the worst. At my friend Leah's family's housewarming party, our pastor arrived to say a prayer of blessing. I was rushing about here and there, recruited to ensure a steady supply of clean dishes and cutlery. After the formal events of the evening, a certain church leader leaned against a particular corner in the kitchen, just next to the doorway leading to the front hall. I remember the deep cherry wood of the cabinets, popular then at that time, he just next to a unit operating as a desk. There he stuck out his arm and stopped me as I passed by, then pointed at his cheek with a wink, his inaudible way of indicating I should kiss it. To such a man I could never even contemplate saying no, and besides, no words had been offered to which I might reply. His head lowered, and as I leaned up and forward, he strategically adjusted the angle of his face. Our lips brushed. I ducked. I ran. The sound of his chuckles penetrated my ear canals, an oral assault to finish off the physical. Kiss the man, lest he be angry, and you perish in the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled. This was my first kiss.
We have our children. We have our children.
This has been No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism.
We have our children. We have our children.
If you have appreciated this free audiobook and would like to make a donation to the author, please visit this podcast's Spotify site. This is No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism.
Awful smoke for a rebel.
Written by Valerie H. Hobbs. Read by the author. With original music by Jonathan and Caroline Hodges.
Stand a chance in my world.
Originally published in open access print form by Mayfly Books.
That girl.
Chapter 13. The destiny of your very soul is at stake. It is possible to be deluded. It is possible to have a false security. It would be tragic to go through life living a lie. Every professing Christian should ask himself, am I really a genuine Christian? Do I manifest the traits of a true disciple? Reverend John Otis, Who is the Genuine Christian? The Council of Chalcedon, 1988, Issue 8. Comply, resist, or hide. Whichever I chose, the outcome seemed the same. More than once I retreated to the woods, rubbed my face, my arm with poison ivy. My eyelids swelled and shut, my arm oozed. I would render myself repulsive to any such gaze. I could not get away. Oh God, where is my refuge? Do not leave me defenseless. In and amongst so much vicious noise, as I sank into the pit of myself, I early on began to look around for other neglected and unknown things. Like so much other coping behavior, I did this instinctively. Another means for me to connect with some world beyond the boundaries of our cold community. When I was very young, it was as simple as pocketing a glass button I found in the street, an unusual leaf, an acorn, a colorful string, or even a paperclip. Wherever I went, I carried one or more of these treasures in a coat pocket, or zipped into the inner compartment of a thrifted white leather clutch I sometimes carried. The items I found were never relics of home. Crucially, they were things that seemed to me wholly disconnected from any space I inhabited. For this reason, I learned I had to keep them hidden, since once an item entered the public eye of my family or certain members of my church school, it could be seized. This lesson came after a period collecting kittens and puppies that seemed to me abandoned. As soon as they became aware of each animal, my parents made the journey to the local pound in my father's work van, delivering whichever homeless creature I'd adopted to an uncertain fate. Each time I felt again a surge of searing separation from life somewhere out there, from some semblance of hope. So what I found could be seized and lost again. What was worse, it could be ridiculed or admired. The latter was equally as bad as the former, deposited as each item would then be into the repertoire of some church school person. Now no longer my sacred thing, but ours, theirs. Our pastor's eldest daughter, Diana, would often publicly claim things she especially liked, telling a detailed personal story demonstrating why she alone had the most special, the closest connection to some tree, some musical artist, some food, some author, some location. When you were driving that way, did you pass my tree? That's my special tree, you know. Anyone else who expressed any appreciation at all for anything she earmarked was somehow participating in her family's curated collection, their ancestral brand. We declared it to be good, so of course you like it too. Doesn't everyone want to be just like us? For all these reasons, I kept all things I treasured to myself. All my genuine joy I squirreled away. As I got older, as experience taught me to trust in each new day's potential, I looked beyond just the concrete, things I could touch and handle and carry, to the abstract, even the fleeting. The reassuring touch of soap and warm water on my face, the hectic push of wind against my back, the resolution of my breath as I climbed a hill on my bike, the susurration of the wind moving across leaves, a hug of hot soup in my stomach. One day I discovered a grove of pitcher orchids in the woods behind my house. Our science teacher didn't believe my joyful account, and this I took as a sign that this too must be kept secret, protected as sacred. Gradually, I let go of any compulsion to hold in my hands the things I found. I could leave behind an unblemished acorn in the woods, since another would certainly come, or something like it, perhaps something even better. In this way, I began slowly to place some trust in the world. All such items, all these moments, I gave the same name: secret presents. Initially, I had no conscious idea of who might be the giver of these gifts. The universe, maybe, or perhaps they came to me through the power of my own summoning. This thought thrilled me for quite some time. But as the years went by, I came to think that maybe, after all, it was God, who, as he traveled in and amongst the hills and valleys of heaven and earth, came to where I was. And when he saw me, he took pity on me, and wrote my name upon the artifacts of the earth, storing them in stealth for me alone to spy and hold in my desperate hands. This was the comfort of my childhood, that perhaps the God we worshipped weekly was in truth a false God, and not this God of small things who met me in the woods, in a tree, or in a gutter. A God I'd come to look for, wonder about, and expect. My God of the lost and found. All these secret presents were his trail of breadcrumbs. They'd lead me somewhere, only I had to watch, gather, and wait, and tell no one. In and amongst all these lost and neglected things, perhaps I could one day locate myself. Perhaps in finding, I too would be found. This has been No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism. If you have appreciated this free audiobook and would like to make a donation to the author, please visit this podcast's Spotify site. This is No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism.
Awful smoke for
Written by Valerie H. Hobbs. Read by the author. With original music by Jonathan and Caroline Hodges. Originally published in open access print form by Mayfly Books. Chapter 14. She does her daily chores cheerfully and not grudgingly or bitterly, as many women do today. Reverend Joseph Morecraft. A full-length portrait of a virtuous woman. The Council of Chalcedon, 1999, Issue 1. The principle of tabula rasa is this. The human mind at birth has no innate ideas, is rather a scraped tablet, ready for the world's writing. Our entire internal mental state comes through experience, perception, being situated in some environment. Its counterpart is innatism, the belief that a human infant is born with an inborn structure, placed there by God or some other supernatural being, or perhaps nothing but our biology. Upon birth, this structure is activated by every encounter with the earth, shaped and filled further by it. So the thinking goes. The fundamentalist Christian version eclipses these, beyond the doctrine of original sin, which speaks of the universal fallen state of all human beings, our natural proclivity to sin that lingers since our first parents fell from paradise. More than this, some Christians believe women to be particularly and principally wicked, from infancy eyeing the forbidden fruit, one foot always inclining towards the gloom. This is the unofficial doctrine of woman's special depravity, malum rasa, the evil slate. Left to herself, or in a hive of corrupt and rebellious Jezebels, she will infect the church, just as she has already ruined the world. But kept perpetually virginal, infantile, sequestered, educated principally by the wisdom of her father, and then one day her husband, men whose hands hold up the universe, perhaps she can be scraped clean again, emptied out and filled by men. Perhaps all may be well. But this is only the short version. Training up a girl in the way she should go involves a careful division and hierarchy of labor. Men carry out the holy work of breadwinning and of formal Bible instruction. After marriage, husbands are to instruct their uneducated wives in the discovery and mechanics of their own foreign female bodies for the purposes of man-centered sex. And as for the rest of our tutelage, this is women's work, a team of devoted matriarchs propping up the patriarchy, weaponized against one another, in service of our own destruction. If a man appears to assist in any feminine duty, his help and his discipline is a last resort, a sign of some female failure. Even worse is when man must by duty materialize in order to stand in the gap of an inadequate brother. Unprompted and nearly always unwanted, such a hero will appear, Captain Conqueror, to set aright all floundering men who thus embarrass their fathers and brothers, those who listen to or learn from women, emasculated as all such men are assumed to be, to rebuke them and set the world back in its proper order. If the errant man in question does not respond well to this macho display of correction, does not take up the mantle of his domination duties, the hero must escalate and put the offender's woman back in her rightful place by whatever means necessary, as a matter of urgency. "Does he know you're wearing that?" my father once said to me, rebuking me via my boyfriend's presumed oversight during one of my weekend visits. "Where is your husband?" is another one I've heard. "As elders of the city, we shall summon this woman's true head and speak to him." Or even, in one particularly horrific incident, I was recipient of this abominable bulletin: "Your husband wasn't doing his duty, so I had to step in." Yet even in the face of all this vile and humiliating man-titlement, and there is indeed so much of it, there is perhaps no force more threatening and formidable against women than we women ourselves, fueled by submissive zeal and the ever-present threat of punishment from our master superiors, alongside the hope of freedom by means of their favor. At some point, I was identified by Mrs. Pastor's wife as a potential model of ladylike subordination in our multi-level misogynist marketing scheme. Or perhaps my threatening nature was growing painfully visible. Thus began her first stage of personalized grooming. I became vaguely aware of this one day in our whole school music lessons. Our pastor's wife began each tutorial with a display of her own prestige by means of a very loud solo warm-up. Now she was instructing us in proper breathing. "Imagine a rubber ring around your waist. Breathe in deeply. Everyone inhale. Imagine the ring expanding outward." We all breathed in deeply and entirely incorrectly, requiring more focus, further direction, more of her expert modeling. No, boys and girls, see how my breathing amplifies my voice? La 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 la. We couldn't see, but she saw our every move. She spotted my straying gaze, distracted as I was by a large insect crawling on the head of a kid in front of me. I tapped on the kid's shoulder to alert him, and in doing so jostled the insect down the collar of his shirt. At this, I gasped, stealing the attention of the class further away from their holy focus. Mrs. Pastor's wife was not pleased. After class, she sternly told me to stay behind, then emphasized how disappointed she was in me, how so many of my girl peers looked to me as an example, how important it was for me to lead in a godly way. Such a notion was news to me. I didn't imagine myself leading anyone, and the possibility of more prying eyes rather unsettled me. I didn't know then what I know now, that those spying my potential were not girls, but mostly women, anxious for new recruits. While we girls collected each other's faults as ammunition, as the adults around us did also, certain women scrutinized our faces, our movements, our clothing, our body shape, our families. Which one can I make my admirer? Which can I conquer and claim? Which can I possess and make my puppet, my brand ambassador, my future daughter-in-law? Let us make women in our image, according to our likeness. Let us create her in our image. In the image of ourselves we will create them. Ladylike and submissive, we created them. The training escalated bit by bit. Mrs. Pastor's wife approached me one day after school and said she had decided I should start working certain afternoons in the church office. I was to start immediately, that very day. Here, let me show you what we'll have you do. My duties included sifting through reams of church documents, coming up with some kind of suitable sorting system, and filing the papers accordingly, all in an airless and windowless rectangular closet crammed to bursting. The Reverend Dr. Pastor's sermons, article drafts and random writings, old church bulletins, magazines, leaflets advertising Friday night suppers, men's meaty breakfasts, women's modest teas and Bible studies. All were priceless historical artifacts. None could be thrown out. No, not even one. Occasionally, Mrs. Pastor's wife asked me to come in on a Saturday, and she was always there, chatting on the phone, making runs to the supermarket for her husband's lunch, an entire rotisserie chicken and some sort of beverage. Now she was fretting she'd bought the wrong drink. Now she was locating napkins for his greasy fingers. All while I thumbed miserably through 1,000,000 miles of dot matrix printouts. I could make no sense of what I was doing. "I'm sure you'll figure it out, dear," was my only direction. I grabbed fistfuls of sermons, notes, outlines, chapters, bulletins, orders of service, all at random, stacking them into folders and boxes. Whatever my hands happened to land on, I threw in. As I worked, I sensed myself dissolving, disappearing under the clutter, under this man. My body, my mind, my time, all less important than this endless archive of minutiae. This homage to every event he had ever overseen, every word he had uttered, every thought. I never finished this pressing cataloging of the pastor's precious papers. The $2.50, or was it $3 per hour, Mrs. Pastor's wife promised me, never materialized. Eventually, somehow, I stopped coming. I don't remember why or how. Likely over time she forgot I was there, stopped looking for me, talking to me. I dissolved before her eyes. What was the point? So I left. Another episode in her characteristic flightiness, from absolute urgency to utter apathy. Eventually, she'd recall my existence and, by extension, my usefulness. Not long after my stint in the church office, I was forced to follow her whims again when she decided once more what I simply must do as a matter of emergency. There was to be a poetry workshop in North Carolina, and I, her special companion. Don't worry about the triple-digit attendance fee. Something about the Reverend Dr. Pastor's discretionary account. Winky wink, it'll be our secret, mentor to protege. Lickety-split, the day arrived. My mother dropped me off at Mrs. Pastor's wife's house, and I carried my bag inside, where she promptly inspected its contents, determined my clothes to be wholly unsuitable, and glided off to her daughter's room for more appropriate attire. Here is a dress Diana has decided doesn't suit her. Why don't you try it on and we'll see if it works? She sauntered from the room, having set things to right, and so I pulled the floral Laura Ashley dress with its massive white collar over my head, tried in vain to squeeze it across my hips. Nothing doing. I sheepishly emerged from the room as I'd entered it. "It's too small," I said simply. "Oh, she replied. "That's strange, as it was too big on my Diana. Who knew she was slenderer than you? Oh well, we probably won't attend church services on Sunday anyway, since they'll likely all be Episcopalian." In her eyes, there was nearly nothing worse, that cursed community of false believers, which my beloved grandmother and aunt happened to belong to. The rest of the trip proceeded in a similar fashion. On the long car journey up to the retreat center, I was treated to a lengthy account of all of Diana's love interests. So many admirers, none of which really have been able to hold her attention. You understand, Valerie. Look, here I've brought some of her modeling photos. I'll let you have a look, Valerie. I was quite literally captive audience to the parable of how Mrs. Pastor's wife had followed the Reverend Dr. Pastor to his chosen university. She had turned down a voice scholarship so she could prioritize married life. Focus on her husband's needs as wives should, Valerie. You understand, Valerie, that a young woman must learn to properly express her emotions and feelings in a way that elevates everyone around her, especially her husband. You must only express emotions to magnify, to praise. To him be the glory forever and ever. This is indeed the only purpose of any womanly feeling. You are listening, Valerie, aren't you? Is there anything you wish to say or ask, Valerie? I was listening. What choice did I have? I nervously asked if I could open my window, recline my seat, and close my eyes for a while, growing more and more nauseated as I was, not only from so many severe sermons, but also from some increasingly noxious fumes that Mrs. Pastor's wife's tortured boat of a car was emitting, poisoning me as if in cahoots with its driver. I was already prone to car sickness and felt I might vomit. That weekend was one of the longest of my life. Mrs. Pastor's wife insisted on reading all my poems before I presented them aloud to the other poetry retreat attendees. All her own poems she performed slowly and dramatically, each on the subject of firm foundations, strong roots dug in deeply. Did you get my special use of metaphor there, everyone? As I listened, again, what choice did I have? My thoughts moved to the image of those most ruthless of vines that spread by runners and suckers. My mother had once tossed a few vine cuttings into the woods, hadn't even bothered to plant them. These soon swallowed up every shrub, every inch of earth. Each object, Every tree these vines encounter belongs to them. They grow as tall as whatever they grow on. Mrs. Pastor's wife declined most of the social activities on our collective behalf, including the aforementioned Sunday service. Instead, she elected to lead me in a microservice, not inside but outside our cabin, in front of all passers-by. This she judged righteous according to the law, by appeal to Old Testament Judge Deborah's undesirable situation as the only available godly leader. Only a last resort. You understand our unfortunate position, Valerie. Our solitary service consisted primarily of Mrs. Pastor's wife's dramatic readings of what seemed to me the lengthiest of the Psalms, followed by her singing hymns loudly to the trees and any other service skippers within earshot, while I mouthed along pointlessly. More than once we took our exercise by walking at a speed of approximately 0.1 miles per hour around the retreat's lake, she pointing out every leaf, every flower, every bird, every speck on every stone, quizzing me on its identity, correcting my wholly inadequate knowledge of southeastern flora and fauna. On the drive home, we stopped in to see Mrs. Pastor's wife's artist friend, the woman who had painted an homage to our pastor's congressional candidacy. I sat silently and watched the clock through their discussions about the intersections of faith and art, taking every brushstroke captive for Christ. Finally, we left. Finally, I was home. Finally, the everlasting weekend was over, forever and ever. Amen. Only now that Mrs. Pastor's wife had begun absorbing me into her substance, she also started inching towards the next stage of her scheme. A suitable period having apparently passed, she announced to me the wonderful news. Oh, just wait till I tell you, Valerie. I would be leading a group which she named the King's Daughters, a combination of Bible studies on feminine personal holiness and free house cleaning available to anyone in the church. Sign up here, families, if you'd like your every household chore attended to by these young women, all glorious within. My companions who followed me, fair virgins, these were 3 elders' daughters and 1 elder's niece, all younger than I. And so began our free compulsory labor, starting with a deep clean of the pastor's house and a few bouts of free babysitting. On one occasion, I arrived obediently to look after Mrs. Pastor's wife's youngest daughter, only to discover her son Matthew also there. And there he stayed, all evening, playing video games and watching American Gladiators with a friend, while I looked after the baby, cleaned up after her, put her to bed, sat strangely with the 2 boys afterwards. The room, the world now divided between us, they in their place, I in mine. The King's Daughters did not last long. I reached my limit. Finally, I found a limit. We were called to one church family's house in total shambles, inches of crumbs, an assortment of ancient spilled sauces, so many past meals accumulated and dried in layers on the dining room table, on the kitchen counters. Everywhere the odor of human shit, piles of dirty diapers, soiled laundry all around us, children weeping and naked from the waist down, the toilet stained yellow with years of urine, every corner clogged with grease, slime, black mold. I saw myself then as I truly was, at the bottom of a heap. Here was my situation according to her command, done to me according to her word, things she herself would not do, what she would never ask her own daughter to do, only me, only these girls younger than I. I never even told her when I ended her ambitious group. By then, I knew she'd likely forgotten about us already. Yet later, I learned that 2 of these kings' daughters had carried on cleaning her house, carried on babysitting, carried on humbling themselves in the presence of Mrs. Pastor's wife, that she might exalt them. This has been No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism. If you have appreciated this free audiobook and would like to make a donation to the author, please visit this podcast's Spotify site. This is No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism.
Awful smoke for
Written by Valerie H. Hobbs. Read by the author. With original music by Jonathan and Caroline Hodges. Originally published in open access print form by Mayfly Books. Chapter 15. Woman must always seek to find herself and the meaning of her life in terms of man. When fallen woman seeks to be the equal of man, she does not attain the happiness which she thinks to find. Only in the role of wife, who seeks truly to be a help to her husband, does the woman properly and ordinarily fulfill her role. Reverend Joseph Morecraft, Eve, the Embodiment of Womanhood, The Council of Chalcedon, 1989, Issue 7. Within the cosmos of Christian fundamentalism, nothing is more unacceptable than a girl who determines or even declares her own destiny. This is the exclusive remit of men, to define what most Christians refer to as calling. And where women's calling is predetermined, wife, mother, servant, men's calling is, quite naturally, to exercise dominion over the world, in whatever sphere seems best suited to them, and then to select the right biblical trademark, woman, to cook their meals, birth their babies, and wipe their asses, so they can go about their high-ranking work unhindered. In keeping with this, most of the girls in my peer group were duly given the same set of restrictions. No calling boys. No showing special interest in any particular boy. To be eager is to be loose. No presumption of being wanted until a member of the man species declares formal and explicitly stated interest. To break any of these rules risked revealing that most important and carefully guarded of all secrets, the existence of female desire. Many of the boys in our church school made full use of this prescribed inability to indicate our wishes, our interests, our disinterests, our dislikes. We were like fish on a string, hooked and gasping, waiting for the fishers of women to keep or throw us back. My strategy was to carry on blending in. As it happened, being decent at sport provided an easy mechanism for this. Often boys would talk openly about this or that around me, in ways showing they'd forgotten I was even there, rendered invisible by the uselessness of my gender in such a situation. After playing basketball at my neighbor friend Thomas's house with another friend Isaac, in the evenings sometimes we'd go to a movie or to the mall. One time, as we were driving around, they spied some girls they knew and started talking about plans to join them somehow for the evening. How could they arrange it? Should they drive back around and stop casually? Isaac suddenly stopped mid-sentence and glanced back at me, my bodily presence having suddenly shifted in meaning. "Valerie, quick, lie down in the back so they don't see you." I was indignant, yet I crouched down, accustomed as I was already to making myself low. I wondered then if they'd abandon me in the parking lot. Maybe they'd even expect me to stay in the car all night while they followed this other group elsewhere. My brain began mapping payphones I knew were in the area, calculating other means by which I might get home. In the end, the girls didn't acknowledge my companions, so we drove on. They took me home. I felt again that sensation of being pressed down, pushed, positioned into a pedestal onto which men could stand, and suitably propped, take hold of their heart's desires. Most of the boys I knew were adept at annihilating any lingering vestiges of a girl's self-esteem, but perhaps no one was more skilled at this than the pastor's son Matthew. An early memory of personal interaction with him is one morning in 4th grade, when he called me cool for keeping silent when he cut in front of me in the Foursquare queue. After that, I was officially declared his best friend, and he began choosing a desk next to me in school. I couldn't believe my good luck. We worked together on school projects, one which involved constructing a map of the biblical world to scale. My dad built us a wooden frame into which we poured liquid plaster, then carved out the rounded shape of a cross-section of the world's surface, mountains, valleys, and oceans. About an hour into our second work session, Matthew suddenly remembered another commitment and left as if racing towards some masculine emergency. After that, he stopped showing up altogether. "So sorry, Valerie," he'd say later. "I forgot I have this and that. You'll be fine without me, won't you? You're so much better at this than I am." Over the next few weeks, my brother helped me paint and label the model, wrapped it in old towels for transport, then carefully carried it with me into the building the morning it was due, down the hall into the Bible classroom where we hung it on the wall, to everyone's amazement. "Look what I made with Val!" Matthew was triumphant. The teacher gave us a 99. "Remember that no human creation is perfect. All our righteous deeds are like filthy garments. All of us wither like a leaf. Our iniquities like the wind. They take us away." Much of my time together with Matthew in high school involved me watching him do something, climb something, play some team sport. I sat and I saw, offering up my eyes and my time, a living sacrifice to our friendship. One time he asked if I'd tag along with him somewhere after school. He didn't say where exactly. We stopped for coffee at a gas station on the way, and as we sipped, as he drove, my skin reacted, I presume to some compound in the cheap coffee, and began to bubble up into a network of scarlet and swollen welts. By the time we got to our destination, some registration center for an outdoor sport event, I could no longer bend my arms more than a fraction. While Matthew talked with some acquaintance unknown to me, I walked woodenly to the bathroom and stared in horror at my marshmallow form in the mirror. I bought a bottle of water in a machine, then stood nearby as witness to Matthew's crucial conversation, drinking frantically, hoping I could flush out of my body whatever chemical I'd ingested. Eventually, but with no sense of urgency, Matthew drove me back to the church school building, where my mother, having finished her after-school work, took one look at me and drove me to the hospital where I was treated for anaphylaxis. One year I broke my hip horse riding And Mrs. Pastor's wife showed up with flowers at our door one evening, with a card signed, "Love, Matthew," so inscribed with her own ostentatious handwriting. Unable to depend on me to write a note to myself, buy and deliver flowers to my own doorstep, he'd called on his mother. This was my sarcastic thought. Or maybe, more likely, he'd had nothing to do with it, fickle as he was about the place of our friendship within his list of priorities. Still, I kept this card for years, treasured even the green plastic cardette that held and positioned it above Mrs. Pastor's wife's gift basket of flowers. In truth, I've only just dug it out this very minute and finally thrown it away. This then was our arrangement. I gave and he took. He led and I followed. Periodically, there were patronizing rewards to hold me on the line. At birthdays, at Christmas, on Valentine's Day, Matthew presented me with clothes, cash, cards declaring the perfection of my loyalty. He clothed me as if I was his child, the fact of my being older a matter of irrelevance. One birthday, a group of us went out for a meal, and while we were all inside, he slipped away and fixed a permanent chrome decal from the Christian bookstore onto the back of my car, that one bearing the name of Jesus inside the body of a fish. He'd not sport the name of our Savior on his car, but he'd make sure I witnessed to the world who I belonged to, wherever I went. One year he stopped by my house before Christmas, his hand behind his back, his eyes twinkled, teasing out in suspense his perfect surprise. "Are you ready for your present?" His hand emerged holding a stuffed black bear with a scarlet bow, another ubiquitous card. In his eyes, a proper gift for me, his adoring fan, his infantile and obedient companion. As Matthew and I grew older, to me, we seemed to grow closer. Then again, I see now this came about through his naming of our relationship. Whatever he called the interactions between us, that was the name thereof. Let Valerie be my best friend. And that was who I was. Still, there was some semblance of substance to it. We spent hours playing table tennis at his house, air hockey and billiards at mine. We watched films in his basement. It was there I had my first beer. His sister invited me to her birthday party, so Matthew will have a friend. He and I regularly talked on the phone for hours. Matthew confided his every crush in me, poured out his sad and lonely heart. "Please, Valerie, can you find out if she likes me? Tell me what she says." "Yes, sure, Matthew, no problem. What else could I possibly be doing?" Led this way by him, lacking all confidence and sense of self, I stupidly betrayed each of his crushes with my manipulative suggestions. I helped him nail up each conquest, one by one, a row of girls' heads mounted on his wall, right next to my own. Each new addition seemed to thrill, then bore him. "She is just so self-centered," he said, about a brief relationship with an elder's daughter. Sometimes he'd convince me to dissolve on his behalf whatever tenuous bond I had helped him construct. My loyal hand was the one that stuck the knife in, that carried the weight of rejecting and seeing someone rejected. "I'm so sorry. Matthew just doesn't think God wants you two to be together." Occasionally, Matthew pushed my loyalty too far, even for me, and cracks appeared in our friendship facade. Once I cried angry tears and yelled in outrage when he abandoned me yet again on another shared school project, set me aside according to his secret hierarchy of sacred priorities. At my 17th birthday party, again I was angry with him after he redirected all attention towards himself, when, Driving away from the roller skating rink towards my house, he flipped another driver the bird and got punched in the face through his open window at a red light. Having arrived at my house with a broken tooth, he regaled all our friends on my front porch with his dramatic tale, while I sat inside next to an untouched table of refreshments. Another time in the school cafeteria, I threw chocolate pudding on his white designer school shirt when he joined in on a cruel joke aimed at me. I'd warned him to stop. "I'll throw this at you if you don't. You're not a good friend. A true friend wouldn't do that, Matthew." After, he followed me to the lockers, put out his hand to lean as he reasoned with me, another casual gesture to appease me during a quarrel. "Look now, be sensible, Valerie. No need to get so worked up." This too enraged me, and I slammed his appendage in the locker door. Another time he challenged me to a game of bloody knuckles. He had a habit of engaging girls in some physical challenge, an opportunity for close contact, and a quick top-up of domination. Usually I said no, but I was in some particularly testy mood. Our knuckles cracked together over and over as our fists met, over and over and over. Eventually, mine began to bleed. He laughed and asked if I'd had enough, and again, "Have you had enough? Just say when, Valerie." "No, keep going." Again. That night I filled the bathroom sink with ice and cold water, sank my bruised and bleeding hands beneath the surface. I'd not yet bandaged them. He'd not seen me flinch even once. Each time we fought, he laughed at the thought I'd actually object. "She won't really follow through. No, you'd never, Valerie." And in those times I did object, when I did say, "No, I'm not having this," he'd somehow turn his offenses back on me. My response was too cruel. "How could you ruin my shirt? How could you hurt my hand? How could you not say hello to me? How could you not smile when you saw me, Valerie? How dare you reject me after all I've given you, all I've done? Why are you so mad at me? I expected more from you. Of all you could have done, not this unbearable rejection. Of all people, not you. I thought you were different. What a disappointment that you didn't live up to my need of you. What a shame you aren't so special after all." If I stayed angry for more than a day, he'd leave notes on my car. "I don't deserve you, but you know you love me, Valerie. Do you not even like me? I'm so ashamed, but after all this time, Valerie, aren't we still friends? Aren't I still your favorite?" This has been No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism. If you have appreciated this free audiobook and would like to make a donation to the author, please visit this podcast's Spotify site. This chapter contains depictions of violence against children. Listener discretion is advised. This is No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism.
Awful smoke for
Written by Valerie H. Hobbs. Read by the author. With original music by Jonathan and Caroline Hodges. Originally published in open access print form by Mayfly Books. Chapter 16. God has ordained the state to be an avenger of God's wrath against evildoers. The existence of hell and the necessity of Christ dying on the cross are insurmountable evidence that the death penalty is God's just reward for certain crimes. David E. Goodrum, God and Capital Punishment, The Council of Chalcedon, 1987, Issue 2. Controversial Georgia State Representative Bobby Franklin is under fire again for a bill many believe could criminalize miscarriages. Franklin is a member of Chalcedon Presbyterian Church, one of the few out-and-out Christian Reconstructionist churches. Julie Ingersoll, Georgia legislator behind bill criminalizing miscarriage, is Christian Reconstructionist. Religion Dispatches, 1st of March, 2011. Violence shaded all my church school days. Each moment in between was merely time spent in a holding pen. We were pushed and smacked, threatened, whittled down with words, eyes, pursed lips, hands, objects, singled out for adversity, all according to the curses of the covenant which were written in the law. Items were known to fly through the air from a teacher's desk: an eraser, a whiteboard marker, chalk. All such implements, a hairbrush even, repurposed in the service of sometimes spontaneous cruelty, were now infused with so much negative energy. We dared not defend ourselves. Move your hands. Stay still. Be quiet. Short, sharp sets of words to ensure we never did risk defiance. For years I hated brushing my hair, couldn't bear to cook with a wooden spoon. Most physical touch also startled me. In chapel, one teacher illustrated penal substitutionary atonement by drawing his hand back to strike a child, then prompting another teacher to step in at the last minute. Children, see here is God the Son bearing the blow of God the Father's wrath in place of us. See what we deserve? See how we make Jesus suffer? Our Bible teacher, also a church elder, spoke in class about the necessity of smacking infants until they learn instantaneous obedience. You don't wait until they're old enough to understand. You spank them until they understand. This same teacher suspended me from school after a field trip to an anti-abortion rally, primarily for hitching a ride home in a friend's car without adequately notifying any adult. But what really sent him over the edge was another matter he raised during his rebuke of me: that I'd behaved badly throughout the day, laughing loudly with several friends as we stood outside the state capitol building. I displayed a reckless lack of sobriety, and at such a somber event. Don't you care about the lives of babies, Valerie? The unborn? I had nothing to say to this, so I sat in silence, which he took as insolence. You meant your silence as submissiveness, didn't you, Valerie? My mother said afterwards, intending support, yet once again covering over the enduring complexity of every interaction in our mixed-up, messed-up world. An elder's daughter told me her older brother had pushed their sister down on the bed and threatened to rape her. This same brother eventually had a son, carried out various abusive and otherwise criminal activities. His wife eventually left him and took the boy. A friend in our church school conspired with him to meet his son's mother at a restaurant and take the boy from her while she was in the restroom. This same co-conspirator invaded a girl's bedroom in the middle of the night and sat there in the shadows, simply watching her, staring at her sleeping. Another elder's grown son-in-law, for whom I was a regular babysitter, asked me to collaborate with him on his impulse prank one evening at a cocktail party, during which I would be paid to supervise his kids. "I'm going to tell everyone I've left my wife, and you're my new younger girlfriend. Just go along with it," he hurriedly told me as we walked up the path to the front door, he draping his arm casually across my shoulders. His wife was already there setting up the party, oblivious of what he'd said to me. At some point, I began having random, uncontrollable bouts of crying in school, sometimes in front of everyone, full-blown panic attacks. Once when watching some violent film in science class one afternoon. Another time upon hearing one single snide word too many. "You never really laugh anymore," our basketball coach said. "Try to smile when you walk into church," my mother corrected me. "Pretty little girls when they cry and pout look like Izzy with a ring in her snout," sang Mrs. Pastor's wife's sister. "Why didn't you look happy when you saw me?" Matthew complained one Sunday, when we happened to walk into church at the same time. This comment from Matthew followed an event just a few days before, when I'd gone to a concert with him and another friend, Jonathan. This wasn't the type of event Matthew usually included me in, but it had happened that I was with Jenny at a salon while she was having her nails done, when they rang to see if she could go. "No, but maybe Valerie wants to?" In truth, no, I didn't want to go. I couldn't think of anything worse, really. I hated crowds and loud noise, and worried about who else might be going that I didn't know. But I also happened to be feeling particularly defiant about the way Matthew so often arranged my social calendar without my knowledge or say-so. Here, Jenny had given me an opportunity to disrupt the established order, and I couldn't resist the chance to unsettle and test it. Oddly, my mother said nothing disagreeable when I mentioned where I was going and who I was going with. Behold, the pastor's son would protect her child and keep her alive, and she shall be called blessed upon the earth. That night, after we found our cheap seats, Matthew spotted some of his neighborhood friends sitting nearby, and together they formed a plan to rush past the security guards blocking the entrance to the floor near the stage. No one asked for my thoughts on the matter, but neither did I want to be left alone in an empty row of stadium seats. So, together with the others, I moved without a word to stand on the stairs that led down to the more exclusive stadium floor. In no time at all, others all around saw us. Word spread of what we were doing. A crowd quickly filled the stairs. Someone yelled, "Go!" And I felt myself shoved, pushed, down, 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 until finally my feet fumbled when trying to find their next step. Frantically, my limbs felt for something solid through the air. I tumbled and landed on the unforgiving cement at the bottom, hard, bruising my knees and my cheek. Sensing the coming crowd at my back, I had a sudden vision of being trampled. I jumped up and limped quickly toward the crowd by the stage. I didn't see Matthew or Jonathan the rest of the concert. I hunted for them, but eventually just settled into the envelope of anonymity within which the crowd enclosed me without question or judgment. After several hours of smoke and volume, it was all over. I headed back to the seats from which we'd started our evening, and the two boys were waiting there for me, chatting with Matthew's other friends. "We saw you, but you seemed fine," Matthew said, his way of making our separation out to be what was best for me, he the one who always knew best. I wondered then if he'd formed this plan as soon as he'd been forced to include me. "Quick!" I could see his mind moving. "Figure out how to get rid of Valerie. Put her away, lest I look on her and see, lest she sees me." The sanctity of his own sense of self seemed always reliant on my chastity, my ignorance, on me and certain other girls not learning what he got up to, never participating in it, lest the whole world's engine freeze and fall to pieces, dependent as it is on the blessed purity and ignorance of women. This has been No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism. If you have appreciated this free audiobook and would like to make a donation to the author, please visit this podcast's Spotify site. This is No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism.
Awful smoke for a rebel.
Written by Valerie H. Hobbs. Read by the author. With original music by Jonathan and Caroline Hodges. Originally published in open access print form by Mayfly Books. Chapter 17. The Bible permits slavery. This statement will come as a shock to most people. David Chilton, Productive Christians in an Age of Guilt Manipulators, Institute for Christian Economics, 1981. Inequality is the rule in this life, and inequality will be the rule in heaven. Some will be wealthier than others, and even in hell, some will be beaten with many stripes, some few. The teachers who want or have respect for the treasure of the Lord should study Rushduni's Institutes of Biblical Law and learn to govern their teaching techniques by God's law. Ellsworth McIntyre, Beware of Those Who Gush. Chalcedon Magazine, 1st of February, 1998. We were anything but pure. We were disloyal, unkind, self-righteous, cold. Our teachers regularly organized us into debates on various theological questions, during which we would cruelly berate and tear each other down. One school term, coinciding with the annual Christian training seminars held in our city, the notorious Christian Reconstructionist Greg Bonson spent some weeks instructing a group of us in logic and presuppositionalist apologetics. He drew 2 pictures on the board of a stereotypically male face, one with a mustache and one without. A Christian isn't just a person with a mustache, he said. Everything about us is different from the pagan, the unbeliever. We think differently, we act differently, we are altogether different. We students quickly learned that this sharp division, already seeming to exclude us women as it had, involved drawing a circle even smaller than this. This came about when, after these sessions, our Bible teacher assigned certain students among us, notably these were kids from other churches, to contend with the shining stars of our church school's frigid religion. We would argue not for the salvation of the soul, but for Calvinism, and they for Arminianism. One debate was held publicly in front of an audience comprising the whole school, along with some parents. I sat alongside my fellow Calvinists, Leah and Joel the elder's son, our debate captain, who smirked throughout and even banged his head on the desk in a show of pride and disdain at the perceived weakness of the opposing team. I too was full of self-righteous arrogance, covering my mouth to suppress a laugh at the other team, sharing looks. Some of the parents were deeply upset afterwards, people who couldn't handle hearing the truth, as one of our teachers put it. We reveled in the power of our reason. We openly mocked the effects of our displays of genius on others, their foreign fragility. We gave no ground. We tore our opponents apart, performing arrogant autopsies on live bodies. We felt no regret. We felt nothing but certainty. Our critical eyes looked always out and never in. Our tongues devised destruction like sharp razors, iron sharpening iron. As some among us, men and women, grew disillusioned, developed better sense, perhaps miraculously found the God of mercy, kindness, and justice, there fell from their eyes something like scales, and they regained their sight, took their things, and left. Our pastor kept careful track of this slow trickle towards the door, in his own kind of folder of fates, a consecrated mental list of good and evil, his whims detailing everyone's destiny. If we walked out the door, we were his enemy. If we doubted, we were never a Christian. A story circulated of someone walking into the church office unannounced and overhearing our pastor mumbling, "I hate them, I hate them, I hate them." Our pastor joked proudly from the pulpit about rumors that he preached behind bulletproof glass. Sermons were increasingly punctuated with veiled references to some pathetic person who'd left, who was thinking of leaving, someone who'd prioritized the pursuit of romantic love and friendship over correct doctrine, some man who'd gotten married and chosen his new wife's church, someone who'd moved away for no approved reason. All people who compromised, who failed, who lacked self-control, who lacked vision. Weak people. To compromise was to depart from any of our pastor's dictated directions. To leave was to lose. To love was to conform, to control. Each message trumpeted from the pulpit, from the classroom, all these sounded down into every interaction, every friendship, every marriage, all forged in conflict. Some who left the church also renounced all semblance of faith. A teacher told our class that she'd warned her son that if he declared one day he was no longer a Christian, he must leave her house that same day and could have no relationship with her ever again unless and until he repented and was restored. I learned then that even the seemingly sacred sanctum of the nuclear family had its limits. A thick cloud of desperation descended and settled. An elder after church one Sunday evening stood and asked our pastor to pray for our community's faltering young people. As needs must, our church magazine ran an article one year on excommunication in the home, which laid out the principles of shunning. The ultimate aim being the shame that leads to repentance and righteousness. Quote, "It is the church's responsibility to see that he feels that shame." There were, as always, a few caveats, of course for women, including that, quote, "A wife cannot refuse to perform marital and domestic duties if her husband is excommunicated. She cannot refuse preparing meals, conjugal relations, etc." I saw such shunning in action more than once. For a time, our family took in a man in the church who'd been excommunicated for adultery. My mother delivered his meals down to a table in our unfinished basement. We siblings looked down the length of the stairs as our mother descended with her tray. We studied the outcast in his white undershirt, his elbows resting on our card table, his collared work shirt on a clothes hanger suspended from an overhead pipe, he murmuring his thanks. "So kind of you. Thank you for having me. Really, it's so generous." This message of control and conflict attracted more people of control and conflict. Things seemed to go stranger and more volatile by the week, even by the day. After one particular Sunday morning service, as I made my way between the 2 blocks of chairs towards the exit, I saw a huge human turd lying on the carpet, dead center in the back of the central aisle. I pointed it out to my friend Leah. "Must have fallen out of a baby's diaper?" She shrugged. I wasn't so sure. I'd changed enough diapers at that point to know what we were and were not looking at. "That doesn't seem possible," I said. "But also, when and how?" Someone discreetly removed it, replacing the carpet tile it had been deposited on. So easy, done and dusted, like it was never there. Then one day after school, during my stint working in the church office, I was among the last to leave. An odd and perpetually solitary man from church appeared, wanting to speak to the pastor, disappointed he had already gone home. I can't remember this man's name, only that one day he'd shown up at church, during the service had slithered ever closer to the front of the sanctuary, until there he was, stood in front near the corner of the stage below the pulpit. "Excuse me, sir," he'd said, and made some gesture that indicated an impending announcement. He'd no doubt have started talking just then, except our pastor motioned back towards him with a raised hand, ended the service quickly, stepped down from the stage to talk to him privately. The two stood and spoke, nodded and shook hands. After that, we'd seen the man in regular attendance. Now, how had I become involved in conversation here with him in the church office? There was never a moment of decision in all these times that I can recall. These things never came about by any conscious choice of my own. Predestined by others, they simply seemed only to happen. Now here I was, sitting, listening without interruption to this white man's narrative of the useful institution of slavery in the American South, the genetic inferiority of people of color, suited as they are for sport and physical labor, he insisted, perspiring as he spoke, occasionally pulling at his inconsistent beard. Their captors did them a service, really, he argued, rescuing them from their savage world, bringing such unacceptably conspicuous bodies into the superior spiritual presence of the new Christian world. At some point, another adult white man member of the church passed by the office, joined us, sat quietly beside, and said nothing. An hour passed, maybe 2. I think now about his silent presence, sticking me like glue. If one can overpower she who is alone, 2 can hold her down. I felt uneasy then, but what this pasty man had pressed on me in the church office was merely a more targeted version of what I'd already been taught. The ideology about race, the xenophobia I had already been tutored in, had already internalized. Sophia's brother terrorized us for years with stories of a black man who hid under girls' beds, waiting till the cover of night to reach up and around and grab us as we lay sleeping. Our history textbooks, written by Steve Wilkins, were full not only of misogyny, but of the whitewashing of human trafficking, lies about the glories of the Confederacy, the injustices perpetrated on the South by means of the War of Northern Aggression, which we learned was above all a theological war. Nothing much really to do with slavery, a mostly peaceful institution. Some masters abused their positions, sure, Some husbands beat their wives and children, a sad reality. What mattered was that these were all unfortunate anomalies in an otherwise noble set of institutions. Southern history is full of Christian heritage to remember, enjoy, and imitate for the future, one article in our church magazine argued. Our pastor regularly applauded from the pulpit the apologetic of, as fellow Christian Reconstructionist Doug Wilson put it, the quote, sticky issue of slavery, by one of our movement's heroes, Robert Louis Dabney, Confederate chaplain and chief of staff to General Stonewall Jackson. Pictures of Confederate generals in various regal poses propped up all such talk, prominently displayed in the pastors', the elders', and other church members' homes. Yet our pastor was always careful with his words, ready always to rebut any accusations of racism. No, you mistake me. I didn't mean that exactly. You've misunderstood. I preach against all racists alike. I am not a racist. I am not a patriarchist either. Years later, during a spat between our pastor and his now former friend-in-arms, Douglas Wilson, our pastor wrote into an Idaho newspaper that, quote, I too am against all self-righteous displays of the Confederate flag. Furthermore, when I visited the offices of Wilson's school in Moscow several years ago, the battle flag and pictures of Confederate soldiers were prominently displayed. Ah, yes. Here is where Reconstructionists, Dominionists, Theonomists, Triumphalists, she-man woman haters, whatever you want to call them, whatever they call themselves, this is where they really shine. How expert they are at qualifying, omitting, letting just enough words pass through their lips, and no more, so as to give the appearance of telling the truth. If ever anyone in our church school displayed the battle flag or pictures of Confederate soldiers, and they most certainly did, it was never self-righteously, let the world understand. This is the slave master's gospel. The roots of this racism, thinly veiled as it often is, of course continues to run deep, as Professor of Religion Anthea Butler has so thoroughly exposed. One of the main publications of our movement, Rushdoony's Journal of Christian Reconstruction, had, in its winter issue of 1977 to 78, published a special issue on the family. Alongside various articles emphasizing the usual importance of man heads of family implementing biblical law in the home, and the dangers of singleness and divorce, was a reprint of a 1976 article from the Los Angeles Times outlining high black illegitimacy. According to various quoted experts, black babies born out of wedlock could be linked not to systemic racism, but to, quote, educational as well as cultural differences. Also included in this journal issue was a reprint of George Gilder's 1974 article, In Defense of Monogamy. There, Gilder argued that black poverty can be largely explained by the unmarried status of black men, and further, that the central facts about crime are not racial, they are sexual. He would expand on these ideas for a book in 1979 entitled Visible Man, prompting 50 students to turn their backs in protest to him during a commencement address for American University in 1981. Gilder was typical of the kinds of extremists that my community ran alongside. After graduating from Harvard in the early 1960s, Gilder spent some time writing speeches for various Republican leaders, Nelson Rockefeller, George Romney, and Richard Nixon. At some point in that period, he underwent some kind of conversion to right-wing extremism, which he elaborated on for an interview in 1982. In the 1970s, Gilder took on the women's movement, including defending President Nixon's veto of a daycare bill in a series of articles and books like Sexual Suicide and Men and Marriage that questioned feminism's fundamental tenets. Alongside R.J. Rushdoony, Jerry Falwell, Oliver North, Kenneth Starr, Phyllis Schlafly, Pat Robertson, and some others, Gilder was one of the earliest members of the Council for National Policy, founded by the Reverend Tim LaHaye in 1981, to bring together various right-wing conservative Christian leaders and wealthy funders. Gilder would go on to co-found the Discovery Institute, a think tank promoting a conservative public policy agenda, including advocating for the teaching of intelligent design in state schools. In short, Gilder was a kindred spirit, of the sort who ducked and dodged, who said hateful things while decrying hate of any sort. One year, 2 black girls started attending our school, an anomaly in our almost exclusively white community. This was the same year my friend Leah, the elder's daughter, decided to do her school report on Martin Luther King Jr. She entered class the day it was due, hauling her enormous visual aid, a blown-up check written to the American Communist Party, purportedly signed by King himself. Together with the rest of the class, these 2 black girls sat and listened as Leah detailed the FBI's surveillance of Reverend Dr. King, led by J. Edgar Hoover. Rumors of King's extramarital affairs, his lies, his socialist links. Afterwards, the 2 girls objected. What about what King did for education? He secured our right to education. We are here because of him. Education is not a right, it is a privilege, the teacher replied curtly. We said nothing more on the matter. She too was an elder's wife. Each word from her was consecrated, to be heard and affirmed without question. This has been No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism. If you have appreciated this free audiobook and would like to make a donation to the author, please visit this podcast's Spotify site. This chapter contains depictions of violence against children. Listener discretion is advised. This is No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism.
Awful smoke for a rebel.
Written by Valerie H. Hobbs. Read by the author. With original music by Jonathan and Caroline Hodges. Originally published in open access print form by Mayfly Books. Chapter 18. Parents must recognize that in sending a child to Christian school, they are surrendering to the teacher full parental authority over the child. He or she truly is in loco parentis. The teacher, therefore, must have full parental authority during the hours the child is under his discipleship, to guide him and respond to him on all levels. J. Adams, quoted by Robert Lester in Getting Involved at School, The Council of Chalcedon, 1991, Issue 6. What about an excommunicated child, son or daughter, who is no longer a dependent, not living at home? If they are excommunicated, should they not be treated as any other excommunicated person in the church? They ought to be disinherited as well. They should not, it seems to me, be included in family reunions, celebrations such as birthdays and anniversaries, or other holidays. As we have read earlier, should they not be treated as banished, dead? Reverend Wayne Rogers, Excommunication in the Home, The Council of Chalcedon, 2008, Issue 1. A deacon visited our history class to give us a lesson in economics, and found us disrespectful and non-compliant, then issued an edict that he, not our usual teacher, would decide our grades. We'd now each have to phone him individually in our disgrace, prostrate ourselves and bless his name. Only then would he decide our fate. A son of this deacon, my age, occasionally showed up at school with jarred baby food for lunch, though no infant lived at his house. Creamed spinach, green beans, turkey, cranberry, and sweet potato mush. Behave like a child, and you will be treated like one, spoken to like one. You will even eat like one. This too carried on for some time without comment, as did so many vile things of this sort. Oh, his family's just like that. His father's just like that. The pastor's just like that. That's just how boys are. He's just immature. This is just what we do. It was just a joke. It was just an accident. It was just a misunderstanding. Every injustice, every act of cruelty was just how things are, just how things will be. About what was just so, we could never inquire, never challenge, never probe. In this way we covered a multitude of sins. We likewise camouflaged the humiliation of our mortality in odd ways. Most deaths seemed to elicit little more than shrugs, a rapid and meaningless expression of faux sympathy. Yes, it's so sad. Hastily pasted over by some reminder, put one way or another, that our Lord did not die and return to life victorious in order to build a church of spineless whiners. In my 20s, one of my Reconstructionist friends' father died, and upon his demise, her sister-in-law rebuked her tears. "This is not a sad time. It is a time for rejoicing," she said. "Stop it now." I remember thinking, this is it. This glossing over of grief is why, for all those years at my church school, I can recall only a handful of deaths, all others swallowed up in victory. One was the in utero sibling of that deacon's son of baby food infamy, who slipped away into eternity before he was born. His brain had formed outside his skull, a somber detail reported frigidly, factually, to our class one afternoon. The deacon's son ran out of the room then, crying. I thought then this public announcement must have been the first he'd heard of it. Our church school gathered around a tiny grave one afternoon after school, and our pastor rebuked the sting of death that had pricked the contents of the smallest wooden coffin. What presumption to kill a baby before we could see and judge his body and soul! What right had anyone to set free his tiny spirit from every human's justly deserved prison sentence on this earth? Who dares to single him out from among his cellmates, his brutal family, our harsh and heartless faction? Some years later, I stood outside the church sanctuary, below a lit window after the evening worship service. A small set of us talking over a hushed and hurried account, recently related by someone who'd overheard adults talking. This same deacon's eldest daughter had dared to name the horrors of her home, things right in front of our faces, yet never given the substance of words. I remembered then the young lady's tea I had attended at her house, hosted by her mother, with musical entertainment, of course provided eagerly by the pastor's wife. I had perched miserably with the other young ladies in our hats, spring dresses, and white pantyhose, eating chocolate pudding dirt cake out of a terracotta flower pot, while the adult women chatted casually in the kitchen about wife spanking. Yet more talk about everyday violence, which I absorbed uneasily, but without understanding, sucked up without ceremony. Only now, some final line had been crossed, some internal alarm set off, some awareness achieved that this is not just what people do. No, this is not just. In talking like this, in exposing what lay beneath the thin cover of artificial goodness, this deacon's daughter posed a problem, as does anyone who names and shames bullies. Now comes the maneuvering. Now they will make this family a scapegoat. Look, this family was always trouble. A few bad apples. I always knew they were. They aren't like us. They are the source of any and all sin. Cast them out. Now we are whole. Now we are pure again. Now we will no longer speak of such things. The deacon's son started breaking into the church school buildings, stealing computers, the office's box of petty cash. See how bad he always was? What a shame that family is so dishonorable. Nothing to do with us, then or now. He showed up at my after-school job one day. He confessed it was he who was the thief and vandal. I'm not sure why he chose to tell me, except perhaps that same man-instinct to deposit one's sins on a woman. I didn't condemn him. I told no one. One day, finally, he got caught in the act. My dreams were full of threatening arms reaching out, hands to grab me, lay hold of me, pinch and possess me, rooms of thick, choking shadows that overwhelmed me. Even the light around me was night. I began to believe I was going mad. I developed an odd sort of tactile processing disorder, episodes of sensations of my body being squeezed through a narrow passageway. I felt this most acutely on my tongue. I find it difficult to describe even now, as if my tongue were simultaneously engorged and suspended and stretched across a tight wire. I began to follow every scene to impending disaster in my mind. Taking a step down the stairs, I'd picture myself falling. Opening a window, I'd envision myself plunging to my death. I gazed directly into any and every future horror, staring steadily. My careful and continuous anticipation rebuked and neutralized any element of possible surprise. This carried on for many years, into the early years of adulthood. My life had begun in a wilderness commune, away from human civilization. We'd left that place behind, yet here we were. Wherever you go, there you are. There and back again. I wondered sometimes if perhaps some presence had followed us, some spirit of cruelty emanating from that place, that people, that plot of ground, returning us to it, because from it we were taken. We are dust, and to dust we had returned. I recited a ritual prayer without fail each evening, listing every monstrous possibility, God, please, not this, nor this, nor this. Please, God, anything but this. From brutality there seemed no escape. Where could I go from these evil spirits? Where could I flee from their presence? We were a people of violence. We ate our bread with anxiety and drank water with horror. It seemed none of us would remain. A member of our church was shot several times in the face and chest, somehow surviving with bullets permanently lodged in his skull. An elder's son told Jenny and me in history class that if we traveled to certain countries, we'd certainly be raped. Sophia burned her leg badly while riding on the back of one of her dad's recreational vehicles. One of our younger teachers was assaulted in an attempted abduction by a group of men as she was getting into her car one evening. A boy in the class below mine shattered his leg in a car wreck. The 14-year-old daughter of a family closely connected to our church school took one of her family's guns and with it her own life, with a self-inflicted gunshot to chest. And one night, somehow I heard, someone called. My friend Sophia had shot herself.
We have our children. We have our children.
This has been No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism.